Share your story or your grandparents' story or your great aunts, uncles' stories of being veterans. And also, we're going to learn about an app that can help you bring family memories to life. But is there a story that's shared among your family members that you wish was, somehow documented? That is the purpose of an app called Memory Anchor. It's a software dedicated to honoring the memories of fallen servicemen and women worldwide. And veteran Ryan Mullens is the co-founder of Memory Anchor, and he joins us by Zoom. Hi, Ryan.
Hi, Laurie.
Well, we're going to get to talking about the app, but I also want to say to our listeners how we want to hear from them with the kind of stories that you probably will preserve on the app. So out there in Radio Land, tell us your stories about family members or friends who have sacrificed to fight in the wars. Give us a call, 204-780-0893. Or you can text us at 204-588-7355. And tell us, what did family members do in the war? And what do you have to remember them by, if anything? Do you have letters or photographs? Telegrams? They often sent those very heartrending telegrams in the war. Call us, 204-780-0893. And we're going to get to the callers in just a second. But Ryan, I wanted to ask you about this app, Memory Anchor. How did this idea for saving stories digitally come about?
Yeah, well, it kind of goes back to my military history in my family. And I had great-grandfathers in the First World War. One of them actually signed up in Winnipeg and joined the 200th Battalion and fought near the end of the war. And that history kind of goes through my family all the way to my parents, who actually met in the Army. And then I served for about a decade as a combat engineer here in Calgary. And so that military reverence and just kind of that understanding of that service was really important. And when we started losing some of our troops in Afghanistan, that kind of hit home, because here's some people that we actually know that gave their lives in service. And there's a bit of a gap between the name on a headstone and who that person really was. And that was really solidified when I went overseas to France, Belgium, Holland, and you'd see these grave sites of 3,000 or more headstones. And it just leaves you pondering, like, what was the story of that individual? And it was in one of those cemeteries in Holland that I played a flute, Amazing Grace, for a World War II soldier at his brother's grave. And after I played that flute, I was talking to him about his brother and the experiences. And that's when it really landed with me, is we have to do something to make sure that these stories are being passed through the generations.
Well, and that's the thing. These stories are being passed through the generations, but only by word of mouth, handed down, or saving the mementos, that sort of thing. And I want to ask you in a minute about how the app would work, but let's go to the phone lines. We have Gord on the line. Hello, Gord.
Hi there.
Hi. What are your veteran memories?
Well, it's interesting because my dad fought in the First World War, not the Second, but the First World War. He was 15 when he enlisted as a Métis man, and already had three brothers that were already in theater overseas. Of the family, one of them, my dad was wounded in the Battle of Cambrai. He was wounded in the leg by machine gun fire. One of his brothers was gassed at Passchendaele, and another one of his brothers was killed at Vimy Ridge. And his third brother survived and had no physical harm and came back home. So for me, my father died when I was only about 4 months old. So I obviously did not know my father. So Remembrance Day becomes for me a very poignant moment and emotional one in terms of remembering my father and his brothers.
Yes. Well, Gord, thank you very much for sharing that story. Very, very meaningful. And yeah, it really brings emotions to the surface, doesn't it, on this day?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your call.
Okay.
So, Ryan, a story like Gord has to tell that involves several members of the family and goes back such a long way. How does your app work where it might aid in preserving a story like Gord's?
Well, and I love that story, and Gord, I love hearing that emotion. You can see how important that is to you. Yeah, and our app is designed to, and what it does is for the sites that are on it, we've mapped out these sites with our partners, whether that's Commonwealth War Graves Commission or other partners. And what it does is it commemorates the individuals at these sites. And so we have over 100 cemeteries around the world right now on our app. And so that goes from France, Belgium, Holland. In Calgary, we just put 2,000 veterans and war dead from the Commonwealth training, air training facilities and such. And so those individuals are commemorated. And with our partners, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, if you have a loved one who was killed during the First or Second World War, they're going to be commemorated through them, and they're one of our partners. And so that's a way that we can get information up to our app. And that way, it's becoming a way to engage with those memories in a different way, using the medium of the phone, which a lot of youth and the current generation is using as well.
So this is an app someone would have on their phone and scan like a headstone marker and be connected with data in some way, or? Yeah.
We were out in Normandy for the 80th anniversary of D-Day, for example, and we covered almost every Canadian soldier who was killed in that conflict, actually any Allied soldier that was killed in that conflict. And so if you were walking through the cemetery and you just were curious, you could hold your phone up to the grave with the app. It would read the story, the name, and bring you the story of that individual, that soldier, and any information that we would have on them. But if you're looking for someone in the cemetery, which is actually really challenging to do on these sites, it's very hard to find people. We have the GPS locations of each of those individuals. And so you can type their name in and be guided to the grave on the site as well.
I see. Well, we're hoping to hear from our listeners wanting to share some stories about a grandparent or a great-grandparent, or perhaps you visited those vast cemeteries overseas. What was your experience like, and what did you bring back from that? Or do you remember a story that someone in your family has handed down to you? Or did perhaps the veterans in your family not speak of the war? I think that was very common. I know in my own family, I have some letters from my granny's brother, so I guess my great uncle, who was at Dunkirk, and the letters though are so cheerful. It's funny, right? Because of course how dreadful it was there being in Dunkirk, but these letters that were over a series of months fighting in France. Just that everything was all right and the people were interesting. They're such relics of bravery and not wanting to worry the people back home.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't even imagine just the way the soldiers would just put a front on and want to protect their loved ones from what they were actually experiencing.
Now, you say you're a former reservist. What other connections do you have to military or family that played a role in the wars? You're saying it's pretty extensive in your family.
Yeah, so my great-grandfathers fought, both of them fought in the First World War. So that was Archibald Cripps and George Oldacre. They, like I said, Archibald actually joined out of Winnipeg with the 200th Battalion. And what's actually beautiful is when he returned, he had bought a wedding ring for his wife. And it's the same wedding ring my wife wears now today. And it's always a little piece that we get to see of him. Further to that, my grandfather, he was too young to fight in the Second World War, but he was part of a group that would pull airmen out of the English Channel. And so they were going around in motorboats to recover these airmen that were downed. And then he joined the Canadian military later and became a signaller with the Canadian Armed Forces and had a long career there. And then, of course, my parents met in the Army. And so the joke is that I owe my life to the Army.
Well, I was speaking to Dr. Bridges just a little while ago about a healthcare report that's come out about the needs of veterans and so on. And she was mentioning that most veterans now are those who have served after 1954. So a lot of our veterans of the First and Second World War are gone. And with them go the stories, I suppose, unless we get them documented. So in your view, how important is that documentation?
It's hugely important, Laurie. It's actually been quite an experience as we put a lot of these cemeteries up, and just the lack of information that we have for these individuals. And, what we're trying to do is give the stories back to these soldiers.
Yeah.
So we're deploying things like AI to give a little bit of context. And so what it will do is read these sparse records and put that information together in just a meaningful small bio. But it's actually very sad that that's all we have for many of these people. A lot of them didn't have wives or children to carry on their memory. They're usually the uncles.
Right.
And